The Knicks will be in the small circle of title favorites. Again, I think they have improved chances, but it is on Tibbs and the coaching staff to make it work by playing the right lineups, pushing the right buttons. And that said, and I've been trying to think about how to say this without it being like a hot take. I slept on this. I thought about it this morning, and I'm like, I would only say this if I really believe it. And I really believe this. I think the Knicks now have the synergy available to them. That I believe that the Knicks will win a championship with Karl-Anthony Towns. This is Hot Hand Theory. This is a podcast where we talk about the NBA and break things down from an analytical perspective. I'm your co-host, XJ. As always, he is my brilliant co-host, Geoff. Geoff, I don't know if you heard this, but the New York Knicks have traded Donte DiVincenzo and salary filler for Karl-Anthony Towns. I'm just kidding. Julius Randle is not salary filler. Julius Randle is an excellent player. But we had to jump on here on a weekend to talk about this because everyone is covering it. Awesome Knicks content creators, national media folks. But as typical, if you've never seen the pod before, we often take a non-traditional view on the NBA that is very much data driven. And I think, Geoff, you and I may both have a bit of a unique take on the huge blockbuster deal and how we evaluate it and what it means that others may not be hearing elsewhere. So I think we should jump right into it. Before we get into the details, and we have a lot of angles we can explore this from, what's your kind of just like immediate overarching takeaway on the deal for both sides, really?
Yeah, so I just want to start by saying good job on you by just getting Timberwolves fan to click the X button before it started by referring to Randle as salary filler. Those nice Minnesotans, the Minnesota folks who are kind of like, me being from South Carolina, I share a kinship with them. And
wait, what? What is the consistency?
Nice, like small
South Carolina,
little small states that maybe get overlooked, the underdogs,
All right. I'll let it pass.
Yeah, they're just looking for some nice content. They don't really get the Randle inside jokes from Knicks verse, and you're just coming in guns blazing.
I'll let it pass. I'll let it pass like Randle won't do to Anthony Edwards. How about that?
Jesus. My initial thoughts are I'm weirdly excited to watch both new versions of these teams. Like, I don't know. I'm a Knicks fan, but I'm an NBA fan. As you know, I watch as much NBA as possible as maybe anyone does. And every season, I'm always so excited to just like watch these new iterations of some of these teams, see what new things coaches are doing. And I think both Finch and Thibodeau are weirdly going to be like excited about their new teams. I think they're going to be able to do some new things that we're going to talk about. The more I think about this trade, I think that there are overall positive and negative trade-offs for both teams that don't make me feel too optimistic or pessimistic for either team. I think it's just like, I think the Knicks didn't know if they wanted to extend Randle at the number he wanted, and they wanted more shooting to allow them to protect the rim. And I think the Timberwolves didn't want Towns on the books for 3 more years at his number. Randle's contract is up at the end of next summer. DiVincenzo is an elite shooter. So like, even if Randle doesn't work out for them and they don't extend him, they still got some draft capital and a really good shooter to get off of Towns, which adds flexibility for them. So yeah, I think you nailed it when you said there are just so many angles to discuss this from that make this so super interesting. But if you just came here looking for, one of the teams to get dunked on, the more I think about it, I just think it's just kind of a neutral trade, and I'm not really over the moon for either team.
Yeah, I that's really great perspective. I kind of agree with you. I don't really think it's like one team really dominated the trade. I think both teams have an opportunity here to really maximize the outcomes from the trade, and it really depends on how they go about doing it. Honestly, like that's what it comes down to me. This is a very kind of unique trade in that there's no immediate winner or loser, in my opinion. It really depends on how the teams operate now moving forward.
And can we also just say, actually, it's kind of illuminating and symbolic of something we talk about at High Hand Theory all the time. The league has shifted to one where there's so much talent, and just across the league, there's so much talent that you almost can't view anything in a vacuum anymore. It's so much context dependent and how the players are used and the role they're used in. And this trade, to add to your point, this trade is another one that signifies that, because, you're I'm going to turn it back over to you because I know you're about to get into it, but like how the Timberwolves deploy Randle, what they ask of him, how the Knicks deploy Towns, what position they play him at primarily. These are things that could elevate or suppress the ceiling of how high these guys' impact for their team can be.
Yeah, that's perfectly said. And kind of segueing into that, just from maybe trying to analyze one aspect of the trade in a vacuum, which to your point is not really possible, especially in the modern NBA, with how elevating coaching has become, how basically we figured out how to operate and play to guys' maximum abilities in many cases, especially the best coaches. But one aspect of the trade that I think people are trying to evaluate is Karl-Anthony Towns and Julius Randle, obviously the big names in the trade. I think Donte DiVincenzo is a huge aspect of it, which is why I started the pod the way I did. My overarching takeaway on that part is that for the Knicks especially, I think Karl-Anthony Towns is a clear upgrade on Julius Randle. I think Karl-Anthony Towns, is just as good a 4 as Julius Randle and a markedly better 5 than Julius Randle. So, obviously he's a true 7-footer. He's played center basically almost the entirety of his career besides the last 2 years. Obviously a significantly better shooter. We'll get into more specifics around that. But I also think Karl-Anthony Towns is sneakily a better passer than Julius Randle, which I feel like most people may not think. I'm not sure.
Can you expand on that? Because what do you mean? I think Randle is clearly I think Randle has a more diverse passing bag. Like he's capable of more passes, which I know you and I don't. We don't. If you have a deeper bag as a scorer, that doesn't make you a better scorer. I know that doesn't immediately translate, but I also would argue that Randle, when he specifically is creating offense, and he forces these collapses in the paints, I think he's capable of some really valuable type passing in terms of creating 3-pointers for his team. We've gone into the data before, but while the Knicks overall didn't really miss a beat without Randle when OG Anunoby remained in the lineup, I do think their 3-point shooting took a big hit, and I think that that's something the Timberwolves could use.
I think so too. I think that Randle has a better ability to kind of draw to the ball, just like in terms of his playmaking ability, self-creation, and also creating for others in terms of collapsing a defense with the ball in his hands. But I think his passing out of those situations is not consistent. I think he turns it over a lot. And I also think that Cat is a better passer in every other way. And what I mean by that is his quick decision making. I think he's a much quicker decision maker than Julius Randle is. I think Randle tends to hold the ball because he thinks he can do so much with it, while Cat is like, either I'm catching and shooting, I'm pump faking and I'm driving, or I'm moving it to the next guy, or I'm doing work in the post. It's like he's a much more decisive offensive player, in my opinion, and has better feel for where the ball should go in many cases, if it's not just like going to the open guy when he's being double teamed. And so in those ways, I do think he's a better passer. And, I think some of the B-ball index metrics kind of support that and suggest that he's a better passer in almost every regard. I think it almost maybe overstates it, but like if you were to look at some of those metrics, basically all of the passing metrics on B-ball index, I think Karl-Anthony Towns grades out higher than Randle on everything almost. I have to take a second look at it, but I think it's like every single metric related to passing.
So do you think that I agree with you about the processing, but just to, mix in some data, Randle's assist percentage last year was 50% higher than Towns's, and his turnover percent was, it was the same, but it was actually lower. So I do agree with you that Randle can turn it over in these double teams. I think he's a slow processor. I think he's a methodical actor. We've talked about this a million times. This is stuff that frustrated the hell out of me. Sometimes, the Knicks would create an advantage. The ball would swing around the perimeter, hit Randle's hands, and he would just be one pass away from a wide open 3, and he would just need to stop and assess the situation. So this is stuff that drives me nuts. I think the Knicks' overall processing improved by this trade. I don't think I agree with overall passing. I think that there are certain areas where the Knicks improved from a team perspective, but I think on the other hand, there are areas where the Timberwolves maybe needed to improve. I think they were a little over reliant on Anthony Edwards to create offense. So while maybe they lost something from a passing perspective, I think they're going to, on the whole, have easier looks for their supporting players and not be as reliant on Anthony Edwards to create everything for them.
Yeah, I generally don't agree. So I do think that, you know, Towns turns the ball over pretty frequently, like you said. But I think that that's the only place where he has an issue with passing. So that would be categorized to me as like his passing efficiency. But we see guys who are like excellent passers have poor passing efficiencies. You know, one that comes to mind is LaMelo Ball, somebody we've talked about. Obviously, I don't think Towns is a LaMelo Ball type, but my point is that when guys are often good passers, they can typically turn the ball over more. And I also think Towns had more freedom to make more difficult passes, whereas Randle in a Tibbs system is like turning over the ball is not acceptable. And so I think we'll see that scale back for Towns, given that Tibbs is going to not allow that to happen. But if we just look at like some metrics like passing versatility, last season, Karl-Anthony Towns was in the 91st percentile. The previous season was in the 97th percentile. Passing creation quality, another B-ball index metric, meaning the quality of looks that he creates for his teammates, 98th percentile last year. So top 2 percentile in the entire league in passing creation quality. And also 96th percentile the year before. If we look at Julius Randle, 74th percentile last year and 53rd percentile the year before, in terms of passing creation quality. So it's not even close in terms of the looks that that either are creating for their teammates. Towns just completely trumps Randle in that regard.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't have a counter to that. That's mostly surprising to me. And that makes me excited to watch Towns even more excited to watch Towns next season, just to see that. I don't think that the Knicks are going to lean on him the way they did Randle. I hope they don't. I hope that Randle is used more, Towns is used more as a spacer, and he's really good down low. So,
Yeah.
I hope that, it's pick and pops, or when the other team switches, Towns gets a switch onto a smaller guy, they post him up and hunt some post ups. But I don't want him initiating offense from the perimeter and basically being like a big LeBron from like Randall's turned himself into, and Zion, being a big wing. I don't see that for Towns. What about you? Do you see his role? Like, do you think they're going to try and basically just make him Randle 2.0, a better shooting Randle, or do you think they're going to change things up a bit?
No, I think they're going to change things up. Like, I don't think we're going to see too much Towns off the dribble. He likes to do stuff. He likes to do things off the dribble. He likes to, get his little pump fake and attack closeouts and do his. And he's good at creating out of those advantage situations. But typically those come out of the 5. When he's at the 5, that's when he can really attack a center and put them on skates in a lot of ways. But I wouldn't want to see them doing that too much. In my opinion, just overall, like my overall overarching perspective is that Towns is a completely underrated, offensively skilled player. I think he's one of the most skilled players in the entire league from an offensive standpoint, at doing everything offensively, at passing, at shooting, at dribbling for his size, at his versatility, his dexterity, at finishing to some extent, at his post-up ability. I think he's just like an exceedingly skilled offensive player that doesn't get enough credit for that because I think he was played mostly out of position last year. He's played at the 4 2 years in a row, whereas before that, almost 100% of his minutes were played at the 5, according to Basketball Reference, going back to his rookie season. And then B, I think that he just gets so much slack for his defensive liabilities throughout his career, being a center and not being the best rim protector. And so I think that a lot of the animosity for Towns goes to that end, but he's also a really, really good post defender, as we've seen him guard, the clips that you've done on Hot Hand Theory's account, guard Nikola Jokic probably better than like almost anybody in the league in terms of his defensive ability on him in the post, and even without fouling as well. So I think just to say overarching, I think Karl-Anthony Towns is a clear upgrade on Julius Randle. The only place that Randle has a clear advantage, in my opinion, is self-creation, off the dribble. And as we've talked about on Hot Hand Theory, I don't really care about that as much because I would almost never prefer Randle doing that over Jalen Brunson. And I also like that they have Mikal Bridges as well now to take off some of that load as a secondary creator. So I don't think it's much of a loss for the Knicks in terms of going from Randle to Towns. I think it's almost all positive in that regard.
Yeah. The more I think about it, I think the upgrade is wider than recent impact metrics would convey. I think that Towns is going to return to a more optimized role for him, and we could even see him approaching some of his peak impact from a few seasons ago, which would be insane. You brought up defense. I know you don't really believe in this too much, but what are your thoughts on the idea of Tibbs being some kind of center whisperer? And I mean, not like getting like Isaiah Hartenstein level impact from Karl-Anthony Towns. I don't think that's a thing. But I do see a world where he kind of gets Towns to hone in on things, on simple. He simplifies the role for him in terms of playing center defensively, and maybe could get the most of him in that area to the point where he's not as big a detriment as he's been in the past as a center. If you look at some of the past metrics, the defensive metrics, they don't really love him as a center, but they do like him a lot more than when he was a power forward, which is obvious to me. Like, you don't want Towns on the perimeter chasing wings and having to make decisions between should I protect the rim and should I close out. Like, I do think playing center defensively weirdly will be easier for him. And I think Tibbs, if a guy was going to get the most out of him, it could be Tibbs. I don't know if that's crazy though.
I really like what you just said about, like, you know, kind of simplifying things for Towns, which I think is important defensively for all the offensive skills and abilities that he has, which I think, again, like I said, he's one of the most skilled offensive players in the league. He often seems a little out of place and confused defensively. He seems like he can be disoriented. He can not know where to be. He doesn't have that same feel for the game that he does offensively on the defensive end. So simplifying things, I think, is really helpful for him. And that, in my opinion, is why he does well against Nikola Jokic. Is like, just guard Jokic. Just keep him from bodying you and putting you under the rim. And that's all you need to do. Don't worry about helping. Don't worry about trying to put your positioning. Don't worry about anything else. And that, I feel like, gets the best out of him. To your comment, I do want to just say, so if Tibbs is seen as this, you know, big whisperer or whatever defensively, like, I would imagine that's a recent thing because, you know, obviously Tibbs coached Minnesota with Towns as his 5 in 2017, 2018, and half of 2019. And, you know, the Timberwolves defensive ratings were 26th in the NBA, 23rd in the NBA, 24th in the NBA. And Towns, they have his rim protection numbers as 70th percentile, 56th percentile, and 74th percentile. And his defensive field goal percentage at the rim versus expected, which obviously attempts to quantify his impact on opponents' shot attempts close to the rim, as 42nd percentile, 77th, and 64th. So, yeah, I don't really see that Tibbs was having such a impressive impact on Towns' ability to defend the rim when he was coaching him. So I don't necessarily expect that, but I think Towns can hold his own if he's next to a guy like OG Anunoby. I think that simplifying his role, putting him next to elite defensive wings like Bridges and OG will be really, really helpful for him. I don't necessarily buy into like Tibbs will make him like, you know, some kind of better 5 than he's ever been in his career.
Interestingly enough, 2018 and 2019 were Towns' career high block percentage and defensive EPM. So
you said what years were his
2018 and 2019.
Oh, okay. Well, I would just say that 2017 was his worst career year defensive EPM.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Like by far. And then 2019, Tibbs only coached him for half the season. He got fired after 40 games. But yeah, anyway, continue.
I think a common misconception, just a little mini side rant here, about good players who are bad defenders or like mediocre defenders is they're always attacked. And I feel like that's the way to not expose their defensive woes often. Like a guy like Towns, if you think a guy like prime James Harden, people would be like, oh, Harden's, all the metrics hate Harden, so we're just gonna like attack him. And it's like, that's the way to engage him. The way to exploit a bad defender is to get them off ball into see their attention span lapse and see them just lose track of things off the ball. That's where they're really weak at. And so a guy like Towns, that's why I mentioned, simplifying his role. If he's, on the ball, on a guy like Embiid, on a guy like Jokic, yeah, he's not going to be perfect, but I do think that that's how you get the best out of him. Whereas if he's asked to do all these things, if he has to make multiple decisions on a defensive possession, if he has to make multiple rotations, I think that's where he can slip up. We haven't mentioned on this side of the ball, he is very prone to foul trouble. But again, I mean, Mitchell Robinson was once very prone to foul trouble, and they kind of locked that in. So who knows? I think Towns will be really interesting to watch in New York, and I think they're gonna look back on this and be happy they made the trade. I think, especially given that they didn't want to extend Randle. Were there any other really options for them? Like I think they felt they needed to make a decision they need to make a change that would create more space for their offensive players, but also allow them to maintain some facsimile of the size that their coach likes.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit before we started recording. Like, I do think I wouldn't characterize it as a panic trade necessarily, but I do think there was some urgency to make this deal because I don't think Tibbs had any interest in this Randle at the 5 small ball lineup that we've been talking about all offseason. And I've maintained from the beginning of the conversation, upon losing Isaiah Hartenstein to the Oklahoma City Thunder in free agency, that I would believe Tibbs would run this lineup out like for a significant amount of time when it happened. I've never changed my tone or my tune on that. I've been consistent all the way through. People have said this is the lineup he's going to play. Tibbs has said this is the lineup he's going to play, and I still had not bought it. So in my opinion, and this is just pure speculation from my end based on how the Knicks have played over the years and how Tibbs, what he seems to prefer, I just think that they really wanted to get Randle out, and the urgency had to do with they weren't coming to an agreement on his deal. I don't think they wanted to pay him what he wanted. They wanted to capitalize on whatever trade value he had, and they also wanted to do it quickly because they didn't want to play this small ball lineup, and Towns makes it so it's not a small ball lineup. Towns being a true 7-footer and a guy who's played center for the vast majority of his career, whether he's been great or not at it defensively, I'm sure it's much more palatable to Tibbs than it would have been playing OG Randle. So I do think that was like a big part of the decision making and why we saw a guy at the level of a Donte DiVincenzo, on the contract that he's on, go out in that deal to kind of supplement, Julius Randle's relatively low trade value when you consider that he was traded for Karl-Anthony Towns, who's on a very large contract that a lot of people think is not a good deal.
Yeah, it's weird how what we said would happen has happened. It's almost played out, but just been fast forward. Because we were, we talked about last year how all Knicks fans were excited about, we've got this depth. And then 2 months into the season, it was like, we got to consolidate. We got too much depth. Too much depth is a problem. And I mean, it just seemed incredibly obvious based on how Tibbs rotates that the minutes just weren't there for DiVincenzo. They weren't going to be there. And he doesn't want to go small. He's never wanted to go small. He literally had his job saved in Philadelphia 2 seasons ago when he finally played Obi and Randle together, won that game. And then, there were all these rumors that they were close to letting him go. And it was like, finally he saw the merit of playing Obi with Randle. He finally got positive returns. And then he just never went back to it ever again. So it's like for whatever reason, right or wrong, he did not see Randle as that guy. And I find it interesting that so many people were building these projections that were like, we can get DiVincenzo 27 minutes a game if there are 15 a night of Randle at center. He wasn't going to play Randle 15 minutes at center. That was never going to happen. Let's just quit that delusion. The front office didn't box him into a corner. I think they like to think they did, but I think at the end of the day, they know the guy they hired. And I think they saw a month away that wasn't going to happen. They were going to get majority of minutes were going to be Precious Achiuwa and Jericho Sims at center. The last comment, or maybe not the last, but at least specifically on this, do you think that they're going to play Towns at center even now, or do you see him in a front court with like Precious Achiuwa to start the season? What are your thoughts there? I say, not knowing your answer at all.
I was gonna say that's a sick lob. Like I feel like prime Vince Carter, and you're just throwing it up. Like, okay, I'm not convinced that Towns is gonna be the 5 for the New York Knicks moving forward. Everybody seems completely sure that this is going to happen. That he's going to be the 5. He's going to play next to OG Anunoby as his 4, and that's going to happen even after Mitchell Robinson returns. So I definitely don't think Mitchell Robinson's coming off the bench backing up Karl-Anthony Towns at the 5. Like I won't believe that until I see it. Now, as far as Towns playing now at the 5 next to OG as opposed to next to Precious, it seems to be the consensus is Brunson, Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Karl-Anthony Towns. I don't know that Josh Hart is going to be playing instead of Precious Achiuwa to start the season. It could be the case because the Knicks don't have a real backup 5, and maybe Tibbs would feel more comfortable with, saying, okay, after Towns comes out, I go to my real center. I'm not sure, but I just don't feel confident in it. And even, okay, obviously this is a long time ago, so things have changed in the NBA and Tibbs has changed, but when he coached Karl-Anthony Towns, he played a whole season at the 5, sure, next to Gorgui Dieng, who is a 7-footer who didn't shoot and who started next to him for 82 games. And then the next season played next to Taj Gibson, another non-shooting big who played next to him for 82 games. So yeah, maybe Towns is the token 5 in that situation. But to me, when I say Towns at the 5, the positions are just technicalities. Like when I say Towns at the 5, I mean he's not playing next to a non-shooting big. If you run him out at the quote-unquote 5 and Precious is next to him, that is absolutely not the condition under which he will make your offense thrive. And you talked about the impact metrics, and I think it's so critical to understand where Towns' value comes from. In the last 2 years, he's been down in terms of his offensive impact to just basically a really, really high-level offensive impact player, sort of on the level of Julius Randle. Maybe Julius Randle has outpaced him in some cases. But when we're talking about when he played, quote-unquote, 100% of his minutes at the 5, from an overall offensive impact standpoint, we're talking about after his rookie season, offensive impacts by estimated plus minus of 97th percentile, 98th percentile, 98th percentile, 99th percentile, and then 2 more 98th percentiles offensively. And it's very similar if you look at the LeBron metric as well as a 5. As a center, he was no doubt a top 5 to 10 offensive impact player over a stretch of like 7 years. Like this is an elite offensive player when he plays at that position, such that anything he's giving up, if he's not the worst rim protector in the league, it's not even close what the trade-off would be. So to me, we see that come way down when he starts playing at the 4 next to Rudy Gobert, and in some cases next to Naz Reid. So in my opinion, if you're talking about getting the most out of Towns, he has to play at the 5, and he has to be next to a non-shooting big, because even when he wasn't with Taj Gibson and Gorgui Dieng, obviously that was a different time. In the modern NBA, they're going to exploit that. They're not going to allow you to play those guys and still have the spacing that you get from a Karl-Anthony Towns that you can't get from almost anyone else aside from a Kristaps Porzingis, or not even a Chet Holmgren is on that level. So to me, I'm not sure about it, but I am sure that in order for the Knicks to get the best out of Towns in terms of his offensive impact, he does have to play at the 5 and not play next to a non-shooter like Precious Achiuwa.
Yeah, this is so good. I love this from just so many angles. Like, man, this pod's going to end up being like 4 hours because just like 4 different thought trees popped in my head of where I could take what you just said, because it's so on point. And if you think about it from Minnesota's perspective, it's why I think the trade is so interesting, because Randle isn't replacing the Towns that was 5 years ago. They've gone down this path with Rudy Gobert. It's why I think it's more tenable for them. If he was replacing Towns of 5 years ago with that sort of impact, this would be a disastrous trade for Minnesota. But that ship has sailed. They don't want him playing center. They don't see him as a center. They want him playing power forward. I think Randle can approximate Towns' impact at power forward specifically, 100% of the power forward minutes. I think Randle can come close to approximating that impact. And I think DiVincenzo makes up that gap, or approaches making up that gap, to the point where I don't view this trade as a disaster for them. But this is so interesting to me because we talked earlier in the season about Mikal Bridges replacing DiVincenzo. Mikal Bridges isn't replacing Donte DiVincenzo in a vacuum. He's replacing Donte DiVincenzo of 2023, 2024. And so when people are talking about Mikal Bridges being a better basketball player than Donte DiVincenzo, I agree. I think Mikal Bridges is a better basketball player than Donte DiVincenzo. I think he's going to get paid more. I think he should get paid more. I think there's tons of evidence that show Mikal Bridges is a better basketball player than Donte DiVincenzo. And on the whole, they're getting an upgrade. But when we're evaluating the Knicks of next season and how much better they got, Mikal Bridges doesn't need to be better than Donte DiVincenzo in a vacuum. He needs to be better than Donte DiVincenzo of last season, which is really, really hard. And one of the ways that Bridges is going to be able to do that is playing in an environment that is conducive to getting the most out of him. And he will do that with the most space possible. That is with Karl-Anthony Towns at center. So these things are all interconnected, and it's why basketball is such a beautiful game, because when you build a team with supporting pieces that is complementary and their impacts are interactive, all of a sudden this is the best form of basketball possible today, where Towns is helping Mikal Bridges because his spacing at the 5 creates the most possible space for his teammates, and Mikal Bridges is helping Towns because all of a sudden he's making a higher percentage of his shots with this more space, and he's defending at a level that maybe another guy wouldn't have been capable of. These are things that aren't diminishing, that don't get in each other's way. They're non-redundant, and it's just, you said it at the top of the show, the Knicks have a chance to not only make this trade a win, but to win a championship. But these things are paramount. They have to do things that will maximize their new pieces.
Yeah, I really love everything you said, and I don't even have any disagreements. I think the key thing that I would extract from what you were just saying is that in terms of Bridges making Towns better and Towns making Bridges better, when you have elite spacing, your playmakers don't need to be elite. Spacing makes creators better. So if people are worried about Mikal Bridges being able to be a secondary, creator and generate offense for the Knicks, and the loss of Julius Randle as this critical playmaker, I understand that to some extent, because obviously Julius Randle is better than Mikal Bridges at that. But now that you have Towns, you don't need Mikal Bridges to be as good as Julius Randle, because it's easier. It just gave him an easier job to have. So in my opinion, that offsets that difference. From the Minnesota angle, and I love the angle that you brought up from Minnesota, you're totally right. It's such a great analogy. It's like Bridges is replacing that year of DiVincenzo, that version of DiVincenzo, and Randle is replacing the version of Towns that we've seen, not Towns at the 5. And that's important to recognize. I also think for Minnesota, I think the Randle fit will still be difficult. I do think so. I think they thought they needed another playmaker. They thought they couldn't rely entirely on Anthony Edwards. And it's really interesting because Minnesota thought they needed another shot creator, and New York actually felt that they had enough with Bridges, and they actually needed another spacer as opposed to another shot creator. So it's almost like two reverse philosophies here. And obviously DiVincenzo is a big needle mover, because if last year is the real Donte DiVincenzo, if last year is what we see from DiVincenzo more or less over the next 3 to 4 years, then that will make all the difference. It's really hard. And I was messaging in the Knicks Film School chat earlier today, and DJ from Knicks Film School made a great point about Donte DiVincenzo. He said, it'd be really difficult. I said, I'm not saying that DiVincenzo's year last year wasn't real, but it'd be really difficult for anybody to replicate it. And it's true. Like, anybody in the league, not just Donte DiVincenzo to replicate it, anybody in the NBA to replicate it. I don't think people understand how insane a shooting season that DiVincenzo had, in terms of, again, I mention this all the time, his aggression from 3, his 3-point volume, his depth of shooting, how far he spaced out, how far he was still efficient and still a sniper from, his shooting efficiency off the dribble on pull-ups, all different kinds of threes. Like, the year that he had was absurd from 3. And so I don't know that he'll be able to replicate that, honestly. But if he does, that does change the equation. So I think those are a lot of open questions that we won't know the answer to until the season starts and we're like 50 games in.
Yeah. I think we should shift the conversation to Minnesota's perspective, but I want to close the loop on the Knicks side of this with one last thing, because you brought up the Precious side of it, and I didn't really get to comment on that. I want to take it a step further. To me, if Precious Achiuwa starts opening night, that is like an untenable solution to me. That's not even, I don't even want to talk about it, because it would be so disastrous on so many levels. It would be a terrible decision. It would just be awful. You're moving Mikal Bridges out of his optimal position. You're playing, like, I don't even know. Precious Achiuwa isn't a power forward. You're defeating the whole purpose of getting Towns over Randle, is to increase the space, and then you're just neutering that space. It would be a terrible decision, and we'll cross that bridge, as Knicks fans, as analysts, when that day comes, if that day comes. But I'm just going to assume that they're smarter than that, and if they're making this decision, it's because they understand what Towns can bring. Moving to the next step and talking about Knicks rotations, I feel very strongly that Deuce McBride should be the starting shooting guard and not Josh Hart. And I know people will be like, oh, you hate Josh Hart, not surprised, yada, yada, and, whatever. This perspective to me is completely rational and logic-based. And the rationale is that Josh Hart is a more versatile player than Deuce McBride is. Deuce McBride is a fine backup point guard, but he has limitations as an initiator of offense. His ideal role right now, probably, especially if the three-point shooting is real, is someone who can guard ones and twos and play off of a really good initiator like Jalen Brunson. That is his ideal role. And Josh Hart can play a little bit of two. I don't love him at two, but he can play three. He can play four. The bench has no wings. If you start Josh Hart, all three of their primary wings are in the starting lineup. Tibbs' rotations are not the best. I've covered this number of times. He is not the best at, shortening shifts and getting guys in and out to increase lineup versatility. If all three of his wings are starting, the result is going to be those three wings are going to play a ridiculous amount of minutes. There isn't going to be any variety. He's just going to be like, yeah, you three are in all the time, and maybe Precious plays power forward somewhat. I think getting Deuce McBride in as the starting shooting guard allows Josh Hart to be that ideal Swiss Army knife across, say, 30 minutes a game. It allows him to play some backup four behind OG Anunoby. It allows him to play some backup three for Mikal Bridges. You get all these different combinations of your five best wings in Jalen Brunson, Deuce McBride, Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, and OG Anunoby. All of a sudden, you can sort of toggle those guys. When Jalen Brunson's not on the court, you can play Deuce with the other three. When Mikal Bridges on the court, yada, yada. You guys get the point. It's easier, given how Tibbs rotates, to get more lineup versatility if Deuce McBride starts the game at shooting guard and Josh Hart can be the guy coming in for one of the wings than it would be with Josh Hart starting out of position at shooting guard, Deuce McBride coming in for one of him or Brunson, and then going from there and trying to get Josh Hart back in the game for one of the wings. It just is a much less tenable carousel. And I think it actually is sneakily really important to their rotations that Deuce starts at shooting guard. I also think with Kolek and or Campaign, they don't have to worry so much about Deuce being the quote-unquote backup point guard. This sort of frees him to be more of an off guard, and it maximizes his impact. So I think there are a number of reasons why starting Deuce is better for the team, both short and long term.
Yeah, this is an incredibly strong argument. I think that I didn't even get to that point of the rotation difficulty and like the depth, the dearth of wings that the Knicks have, and what that would do to start all three of their wings. I think that's an incredibly strong argument, to the extent that I think that the Knicks, like, you've given me hope that the Knicks start Deuce McBride. Like, I think, because I think that Tibbs might see it that way too. We've seen in the past Tibbs do things that, I think most of us would think is a mistake, like starting Jericho Sims so he can bring Isaiah Hartenstein off the bench. So I don't think it needs to be that Tibbs is going to start whoever he thinks is the better player. I think that he will start guys who he thinks works better for his rotation. And so I do think, even if he thinks, hey, Josh Hart's way better player than Deuce McBride, I don't think that. But even if Tibbs thinks that, I don't think that means that he's necessarily going to start him. He still might want to, for the sake of his rotation, have Josh Hart coming off the bench and still get Josh Hart his, 32 minutes per game or whatever the case may be, 32 to 34 minutes per game. So I think that's a very compelling argument, and you've kind of convinced me that it might happen. Like all this time I've been thinking we won't see that lineup with Deuce McBride next to Jalen Brunson as the two guards, and then the Knicks two wings with Towns. But that's really compelling. So I think I also you want to jump on that?
I just want to say we made this prediction last year and we were right by a lot. We were more right than we thought we'd be. If Deuce McBride starts and Towns starts at the 5, I think given reasonable health, the Knicks starting lineup will have the best net rating of any starting lineup in the NBA. I think it's the best starting lineup in the NBA with Deuce McBride at shooting guard.
Yeah, I'm pretty close there with you. I think they'll have the best offensive rating in the NBA. I think they'll have a better offensive rating than the Celtics, than whoever else is out there. Net rating, I'm not so positive. I do, despite what I'm saying about, Towns being better suited for the 5, I do think he's not a great rim protector. And I do think there's going to be a lot of responsibility on OG Anunoby. So I'm not sure the net rating will pan out. Like, I don't feel super, super confident in that, but I do feel like that's definitely one of the handful of possibilities that they end up being the best net rating team in the league with that starting 5.
Yeah, offensive rating is probably more correct, but hot takes are fun.
I do think because we're talking about this now, this trading Donte DiVincenzo, obviously there's some reporting that he wasn't excited about the minutes that he was about to get, which is another thing that we've been talking about here. Guys, if you're not listening to Hot Hand Theory, I don't know what to tell you, but this is something we've been talking about since the moment of the Bridges trade. Donte DiVincenzo was going to get 15 to 18 minutes per game. He was going to be the nominal backup 2. He was going to get the Obi Toppin treatment of you play the minutes that Randle doesn't play. DiVincenzo was going to play the minutes that Bridges doesn't play, and that's the minutes that he was going to get, unless there was some kind of injury, of course. I think that obviously that's part of why they dealt him. I definitely think that they knew that he wasn't going to like that situation, and it doesn't really make sense to have that situation. I would play him at the 3. I would do anything I could to get Donte DiVincenzo on the court if he is who he was last year. That aside, I think that this trade shows so much faith in Deuce McBride. I think that the Knicks believe that Deuce McBride is a real rotation, real player, or else you can't make this deal, because now you had Donte DiVincenzo effectively backfill for Emmanuel Quickley, and now you have Deuce McBride effectively backfill for Donte DiVincenzo. And you can't do that unless you believe that Deuce McBride's shooting is real. He's going to maintain his shooting, and his on-ball defense is going to be at least retained to as good as it has been, and his off-ball defense is going to improve. And unless you believe those things about Deuce McBride and that he can guard 2s and some 3s, then I don't think you can make this deal. I think you have to retain and hold on to Donte DiVincenzo, and I think this is really unlocking Deuce McBride, one of the most valuable contracts in the NBA. The reason that they're able to get a Towns at the dollar amount that he's going to be making is because they have a Deuce McBride at the dollar amount that he's going to be making. So I think that this is just showing the Knicks' faith in McBride, which I think will be well paid off. And I also think it's a great thing for Deuce to be able to kind of now we're going to see his minutes increase from like 12 or 13 to like 20 or 25. So I think that that's going to be really critical.
Yeah, he can't just be the, Brunson supplanter anymore. He's got to play more. They're light on the bench, and he's clearly better than the other guard options they have. Even if they want to, throw Kolek into the deep end or give Campaign some minutes, this is a huge endorsement of Deuce, and honestly, a deserved one. Deuce is a really good basketball player, really, really good supporting player. He can get better on defense, which is crazy given his pedigree. I don't know if I fully buy the shooting, but dude obviously works hard. If the shooting's real, he's the most underpaid player in the league. No, the most underpaid non-star in the league, maybe. I don't know. How far can
he's
you go?
He's the most underpaid player in the league, non-rookie deal in the league, even if his shooting is not as good as it has been. So, but yeah, if the shooting is real, if he's shooting 40% from 3 on high volume, on 7 or 8 attempts from 3 per 75, then Yeah, he's clearly the most undervalued contract in the league.
Yeah, but are we sure he's better than Lonnie Walker?
What is this Lonnie Walker comparison? Where does that come from? I feel like we need to let the audience in on some inside joke that makes Lonnie Walker better than Deuce McBride.
I just saw Celtics fans giving Knicks fans shit for thinking that Deuce McBride's better than Lonnie Walker. And so I was just like, yeah, I was referencing that, I suppose, but that's a silly take, obviously. Lonnie's kind of sweet, though. He had that awesome playoff.
He's good. Yeah, I don't think he's bad, but he's not as good as Deuce McBride, though.
Yeah. I think we should switch over to the Timberwolves perspective and, give any. So we discussed the lineups for the Knicks. I now think the Timberwolves' best lineup has Donte DiVincenzo in it, even though he might not start. And I'm curious, if Conley's 38, Conley has been huge for them. By all accounts, they love Conley over there. They love the intangible stuff he brings, just like day-to-day hard work, leadership, yada, yada. He's an underrated player on the court. He's always been in that, like, George Hill, Kyle Lowry mold of guys who don't really wow you on the tape, but are just solid on both ends of the court. He can shoot. So this is by no means, crapping on Mike Conley. I do think that their best lineup is going to be Edwards, DiVincenzo, McDaniels, Randle, and Naz Reid. I think that's their most. I mean, I know that might sound like Gobert slander too, but I do think that, like, at this point, Gobert he just won Defensive Player of the Year again, but he's definitely not the peak defender he was in Utah. I think Naz Reid can approximate his rim protection and overall defensive impact. He can't do it. He's like 75% of it. But I think he can come close enough to the point where the space and the shooting on offense is just such a big upgrade on the other end of the court. That Timberwolves team is scary. I think you're a little lower on them on the whole than I am. But I think you would agree that there are, again, as we talked about with, this trade is going to be made by how they move forward with these guys. I think you'd agree that there are some versions of this team where DiVincenzo and Randle are put in the right spots. And, this team that made the Western Conference Finals last year could maybe even get better.
I think it's possible. To me, they're just a little clunky now. And it's difficult. It's more difficult to find those right combinations and have them be on the court for sustained periods of time. Like that's where I'm at. Like, you could find those perfect combinations. The one you said, I think, is a really good one. I can still see some downsides with that construction. I think DiVincenzo kind of accommodates a lot of them, but nothing is like quite perfect to me. And to me, that's because I think that Julius Randle is a difficult fit on almost any team in the league. I think putting Randle with Edwards, that is not super clear to me that that's going to be extremely effective. The way that you constructed it, DiVincenzo, McDaniels, and Naz Reid, I think is your best chance of having it be successful for sure, optimally successful. But, I don't think really, personally, I don't think Naz Reid is 75% of the rim protector that Rudy Gobert is. I think he's probably a little worse than that. I don't think that Jaden McDaniels is a real spacer that's going to command respect from teams such that, it gives Anthony Edwards and Julius Randle room to work. I don't think that Edwards is going to like being, off ball. We're talking about a player who was in the 5th percentile of percentage of shots assisted. So this is a guy that's like, he's taking the shots off the dribble. He's not receiving passes. He is the one who's creating the shot for himself. So I don't know how that's going to work with him being in more of a catch and shoot role in some situations with Julius Randle out there, especially in less spacing environments, because Naz Reid is not going to play 30 minutes at the 5 for the Timberwolves. He's just not. Rudy Gobert is going to play 30 minutes at the 5 for the Timberwolves. That is going to happen. There's no way around it unless they trade Rudy Gobert, which they won't. So it's just not quite right to me, and I think they're going to be worse than last year. I think that they had a really good role for Towns in terms of maximizing what he could do defensively in spot situations. Like we talked about the Jokic situation, but kind of doing the best that he could at a 4, kind of out of position, but Rudy Gobert making up for a lot of it on the defensive end. McDaniels and Edwards and Conley being a really good defender himself and a much better shooter than anyone else on their roster besides Donte DiVincenzo. So I think you could potentially, this is going to sound terrible. I don't know if I should say this, but Minnesota, I love you guys. Like, I like Minnesota. I've never visited. I've been to the airport one time. It's cool, very clean and nice. I think it's a cool city. I would go there. I'm saying Minnesota like it's a city. I'm sorry. The cities that you all have there are nice. This is not making it better. I think the best Minnesota lineup is Conley, DiVincenzo, Edwards, McDaniels, and Naz Reid or Gobert. I think the best Timberwolves lineup doesn't include Julius Randle right now.
Isn't that a good thing though? Not good things. Good things an overstep, but isn't like you? I love the word you use, clunky. Clunky does feel right. It is gonna like. It does feel like there are just pieces kind of scattered all over the place that don't on the brim align with one vision. But I do think there is a guiding star and there is one vision, and that vision is Anthony Edwards. That is the goal here. They didn't want Edwards and Towns to be 1A, 1B. This is Edwards' team. They want this to be Edwards' team. And I think the most ideal part of this for them regarding Randle is the fact that he expires next summer. So if he doesn't work, he's got a player option. He's gonna decline his player option, and somebody will give him more money than he's making now, probably. I'm more bullish on the Randle fit than you are. I think that there are areas it can work. I understand and empathize with the perspective that you just gave about their best lineup, because to be clear, I think that Conley, Edwards, DiVincenzo, McDaniels, and then one of the centers is an awesome lineup. Like I don't think it's a bad thing for that to be their best lineup. I think that's legitimately a fringe contending level lineup. They can do almost anything in that lineup, especially if Conley remains the shooter he is and he doesn't, fall off the cliff age-wise. It's a good lineup. I think that for their overall ceiling, it's important to get Randle to fill in. I talked about this on Hot Hand Theory. I think Randle's adaptability is underrated. I think people see him as this helio, ball-dominant, ball-hoggy player who over-dribbles. You've seen the clips. You've seen the way people talk about him. You know it as well as anybody, XJ, and which makes me a little surprised that you're so extreme on this perspective. Or extreme is a bad word. I know you're going to – words are important, Geoff. Whatever word is correct there. 3 of the last 4 seasons, Julius Randle has been an all-star as a Knick. 2 of the last 4 seasons, he's been all-NBA, which is not a small deal. We should not be scoffing all-NBA, being on the all-NBA team twice. That is a really hard thing to do. You're a top 15 player by the voters in the NBA. I know they're not perfect rankings, but you don't make all-NBA teams for being bad. It's not an all-star game. You're not getting fan votes. You're an all-NBA player. You're a freaking good player. And Julius Randle did it twice, and he made the all-star game 3 times. And he did this in entirely different, profiling entirely different ways. And if you're a Timberwolves fan and you're looking for a reason to, be optimistic, I'll give it to you. 2020, 2021, Randle's popularity was as low as it's ever been in New York. Comes out of there. Tibbs is like, hey, man, I believe in you. You're going to be the engine. They build the whole thing around Randle, and he shoots the absolute lights out. This guy, he shot 41% from 3, 48% from long or mid-range. He had a 58% true shooting despite these God mode He made everything that season. That was one of the most ridiculous seasons you'll ever see. He profiled as basically a bigger, thicker Kobe almost. His shot, he didn't get to the rim at all. He shot from the mid-range and he shot threes, and that's what he did. And everybody after that season, especially after the playoff series against the Hawks, 42% true shooting against the Hawks. He was terrible. Everyone was like, oh, yeah, that was fake. Shooting's not sustainable. Turns around 2022, proves him right. He's terrible again in 2022, and Knicks fans are ready to give up on him. 2023, he makes the All-Star team again, and he makes the All-NBA team again, but this time he only shoots 34% from 3. How is he so good this year? Because his shot mapping was as good as it ever was. He shot a ton of threes. He shot from the right places. He shot more at the rim. And this was Brunson's first year. So he did this. He made the All-Star game and the All-NBA team and accommodated an incoming star. Everyone remembers how good Brunson was his first year. And then there are people, he made the All-Star game again last season, and people would argue that this was the best version of Randle we've ever seen. This was a new version. He still didn't shoot well from three. But my point is that I think his adaptability is underrated. I think Chris Finch is an elite coach, and I think that he's going to get stuff out of Randle, who, by the way, is more motivated than maybe he's ever been in his career. Like the team that I know we don't like to get into this intangible stuff, but like he's going to play with a chip on his shoulder. This guy, he's going to be pissed. He chose New York. He wanted to win in New York, and they were like, yeah, we want someone else. Sorry, man. Thanks for all you gave us. He's going to come out with a vengeance, and I think Chris Finch is the guy to point that fury in the right direction. I think he's going to use him in the right places. And again, I'm going to say this for the third time. I just think he's more adaptable than he's given credit for. So I think that's being slept on a little bit.
Yeah, this is another really, as I would expect, from my brilliant co-host, Geoff, another very, very strong argument. I don't have too much to push back on. I largely agree with everything that you're saying, aside from the idea that, I don't know how. So Randle, I think, is very adaptable, but adaptable in a certain way. Adaptable as it relates to what he does with the ball. So it's like, okay, he's not shooting well from three. Okay, he'll take it inside. Is he not shooting well from the mid-range? He'll change his shot diet or something, right? Like if he's creating advantages for himself, can he create advantages for his teammates? I think all of those things have to do with him having the ball. I don't know how adaptable he is off the ball, and that's been the whole question for me with his time in New York next to Jalen Brunson, and I'm going to maintain that question and even ask it even more so because Anthony Edwards' usage matched Jalen Brunson's usage last year, even with Julius Randle out of the lineup for the majority of it. And it's not going down. Anthony Edwards is going to be Anthony Edwards. He believes in himself in that way. This is a guy who played for Team USA and said, oh yeah, I'm still the number one option. Like this is not a guy who's going to say, oh yeah, we got Julius Randle now. Like we'll take turns. Like, no, Julius Randle, you're second dog. You're a second fiddle. You're taking the leftovers. You're finishing the plays that I create. And I don't know how adaptable Julius Randle is in that regard. I know Julius Randle can change his game with the ball in his hands to maximize his impact based on what's falling and what's not and being the best version of himself in that way. I don't know that he can change the fact that, looking at last year, percent of shots assisted, he was 17th percentile. Before that, 21st percentile. Before that, 15th percentile. Before that, 17th percentile. Before that, 19th percentile. This is a guy who has the ball in his hands. He's the one creating. He's the one self-creating and creating for others. And I'm just not sure how that's going to work with Anthony Edwards, especially if Randle is not creating the adequate space for Anthony Edwards to work. And especially if we see the lineup that I suggested run out there and steamroll teams, and then the Randle lineup come back out and it's like a tough match. I'm not sure. I'm just not sure.
Yeah, I think there are two ways to do this. And I think, I text you this on the side. He's not in New York anymore. This is Anthony Edwards' team. He had a little bit of leeway in New York because he signed here. It was his team. And I think they gave him rope that I'm not sure will be afforded to him in Minnesota. He's playing for a contract. He wants to put up a good front. I think that he is going to be more interactive with Edwards in his impact than he ever was with Brunson. I know the bar is really low. I think he's going to screen more. I think they're going to use him in screen and roll with Edwards so that they're helping and elevating each other more than Brunson and Randle did. And then I think the other way is you just stagger him with Edwards a little bit more. So I think, if Randle is the one playing with the bench unit, I know Edwards plays a lot of minutes, but there's 13, 14 minutes a night that Edwards isn't playing. Make sure Randle's on the court for most of those. Make sure he's on the court with, the bench unit guys that are going to want Randle to elevate them. Dillingham's a rookie. They're excited about him, but they're not just going to hand him the keys as a rookie. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, is his shooting real? I don't know. We're going to see next season, but that guy's a hell of a defender. You're not just going to run the offense through him. This bench unit all of a sudden with Randle in it, it's looking. It could be a good bench unit. If you got Dillingham, DiVincenzo, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker with Randle and Naz Reid, what the hell is that bench unit? That's gonna, in my opinion, that's gonna destroy teams too. So you get Randle going that way, and then when he's playing with Edwards, you just have to find that balance between him being a spacer and his impact being interactive with Edwards. Again, I think Chris Finch is creative. I think he's going to find ways to get Randle going in a way that the Knicks weren't able to.
Yeah, I think that's totally viable. I think the staggering is going to be huge. I think he'll definitely get staggered more than he was getting in New York with Jalen Brunson. And I think that'll be really important. I think the other thing that's going to be really important and that it remains to be seen is we know what Minnesota's calling card is, and it's that defense. The defense is absurd. Their defense is absurd. And Karl-Anthony Towns, for all the slack that he gets, was part of that. And his actual kind of periphery defensive metrics grayed out where he's better than Randle defensively. And I think, for me, I kind of like LeBron as an impact metric from a defensive standpoint better than EPM or estimated plus minus, because I think LeBron's luck adjustment is better. And so Towns trumps Randle in defensive impact consistently when you look at the LeBron data as opposed to the EPM data. So I think we'll see if Randle's able to maintain a high level of defense, be able to play off of Anthony Edwards. We'll really see about the running more pick and rolls. We talked a little bit about this yesterday on the side, but Randle has never really been a roller in his career, even though I feel like we kind of have this Mandela effect of Randle being like a great roll man, in New Orleans or in LA at points, but he's never been over a 10% roll man frequency as an entire career. Some of the guys who lead the league are like 30% frequency. So he's never been anywhere near close to that. And the last 2 years, he's been about 4% frequency and 5% frequency, which is like really, really low. B-ball index data has Randle as being a roll and cut big, which is, like a style that they have him listed as no more than 7% of his time throughout his career. In the last 2 years were 1% and 0%. And he's coming off a shoulder surgery, might not even be ready for the beginning of the season potentially. Maybe he will, but I don't know if he's going to be the first thing he's doing after healing and rehabbing his shoulder is like, I'm going to start throwing, 30 screens a night now, throwing my shoulder out there and setting hard screens. So I'm not sure that that's something he's going to want to do. And I'm not sure they'll have time to really like practice it, given that he's being integrated into a different style of offense with Chris Finch. It's a lot of stuff to work on. And maybe we'll see it later in the year, but I don't think we'll see it early. And I think early we'll probably see some challenges. But yeah, like I said, you make a great point, and I think you have the strongest steel man for Randle in Minnesota that I could think of. So I definitely respect it.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely that I think the early returns could point more in the Knicks' favor than the Timberwolves. I think it's going to be easier to integrate Towns. He's already been with Tibbs. He's healthier. The real question for Towns is just what his positional, how his positional ratio looks like, how much he's playing center, how much he's playing power forward, how much Tibbs is going to ask of him defensively. I do think integrating DiVincenzo and Randle is going to be tougher, especially with all the stuff you mentioned. So really, really interesting trade. Man, that was I'm just really proud of that episode. I think we nailed it. Not to break the fourth wall at the audience. I'm just quite proud of it.
Yeah, I think so too. I think we talked about a lot of interesting angles of the deal. I guess just to finish out and to summarize, kind of, what do you think this does for the Knicks title chances? At the end of the day, this is a title contending team. They were with Randle. They intend to be that this year and beyond. And what do you think it does for the Timberwolves title chances, who obviously another title contending team who was right there on the brink last year, was really rolling teams over until, they met their unfortunate demise, which to my chagrin, because I thought they would go to the finals. So yeah, what do you think? What do you think this deal does for the title chances of these two title contending teams in either the Eastern and the Western Conference?
Yeah, I think that the Knicks ceiling raises. I think that, again, they just have to do the right things with this deal. I think that their title chances overall go up. I, God, we've beaten this into the ground, but like, I didn't ever love the Randle Brunson thing. I thought that it was too diminishing. I think we literally created clone theory because we were like, well, would we rather have Brunson by himself with role players, or would we rather have Brunson with Randle, a lesser Brunson with Randle? I think that's a valid question. We haven't even said his name, really, this pod. The Knicks are going to get the best of Jalen Brunson this season. They're going to, and it's not going to be because he is carrying an insane usage like he did at the end of last season when everybody was hurt, and he's facing all these double teams, and he's god moding from the mid range and from three on pull up threes. Jalen Brunson is going to have a high usage because it is unequivocally his offense now, but he's going to be operating in more space than arguably he's ever operated in before in his NBA career. He's the best he's ever been, and now he's in the best environment he's ever been. You want a crazy hot take from me, XJ? I don't think Brunson's going to be the best player in basketball next season. Maybe not even one of the 3 or 5 best. That's really hard level to reach. I think he's going to be in MVP conversations, and he could even win the MVP because of how voters operate. If the Knicks win, 60 plus games and get the 1 seed, and Brunson is clearly the best player on that team,
he'll win MVP in that case. Yeah.
Yeah, how these voters go. I'm just saying, but what I'm saying is that I don't really see a world where he's actually more valuable than Jokic, and I don't want to have to come on pods and be like, well, actually, but I just want to make that clear for people because our goal is to reach, we're going to talk about the whole NBA this season again. We love the whole NBA. I don't want, people to reach the end of this podcast and be like, oh my God, this homer thinks Jalen Brunson is the best player in the NBA. I do not. I'm just talking about with the nature of how people vote, with how the voters vote. I think Jalen Brunson is going to have the best season of his career. I think Towns does that more than Randle does in a supporting way. And yeah, I think the Knicks ceiling went up, but it is essential that they do the things that maximizes Towns' impact, that returns his impact to what you were talking about earlier in his career. I think for the Timberwolves, it stays around the same, maybe goes up depending on how much Randle buys in, how much Finch gets from him, because I'm really high on DiVincenzo. I was not as high on what Towns was doing in Minnesota as other people seem to be. I thought his defense was worse than it seems he was graded at. I think he was not a good power forward defender, even though he did have some nice moments on the ball on Jokic when they cross-matched Cat and Gobert and put Cat on centers. I think that Randle can come close to matching what Towns was doing in Minnesota at power forward. I think DiVincenzo bridges that divide even further. And most importantly, I think long-term, this is good for Minnesota. I think that they get some money off their books. And, again, Randle doesn't work out. They don't have to re-sign him. He can go somewhere else. He can decline his player option, go somewhere else. And all of a sudden, they have a team around Edwards, who is their by far most important player. They have a team around Edwards where they don't really have many bad contracts, and they gain some draft capital back. So, I'm not saying this is a win-win, but based on how things go, I think both franchises can turn this into a win.
Yeah, I think that's a really strong summary. I agree on the Knicks end. I think the Knicks title chances go up. And similar to what you were just saying, I've said this and I've been consistent on this for 3 years. Every time I've been on any podcast and done guest appearances and on Twitter and anywhere else, I've been very consistent on this. I think the Knicks were fighting an uphill battle trying to win a title with Julius Randle. I just think that. I think he doesn't add enough value off ball. He's not quite good enough on ball to command that he take most of the initiation reps when he shares the court with Jalen Brunson. And I just think that the Knicks were so talented that they could still overcome that to win a title, but it was still like an uphill battle of trying to, win at the highest level despite some offensive friction. Now, the Knicks have the opposite of friction. Geoff, do you know what the opposite of friction is? The opposite of friction is they have the perfect offensive lubricant for any system, in my opinion, with Karl-Anthony Towns, a big who is an elite floor spacer. In my opinion, the next best thing to a Lowry Markkanen, who for 2 years has been my dream target for the Knicks as a Randle upgrade. The Knicks will be in the small circle of title favorites. Again, I think they have improved chances, but it is on Tibbs and the coaching staff to make it work by playing the right lineups, pushing the right buttons. And that said, and I've been trying to think about how to say this without it being like a hot take. I've slept on this. I thought about it this morning, and I'm like, I would only say this if I really believe it. And I really believe this. I think the Knicks now have the synergy available to them, that I believe that the Knicks will win a championship with Karl-Anthony Towns. If it's not this year, I think it'll still happen. They have a core of Brunson, OG, Bridges, and Towns all locked up. I mean, Bridges not really, but he will be locked up for years to come. And I think you keep playing with the talent around those guys and find the right fit, and eventually I think they will get over the top and win a championship over the next 3 years.
Can I? I'm sorry. I just want to hold you on that right now.
Yeah.
How would you compare the synergy, the lube of Brunson, Bridges, OG, Towns with White, Brown, Tatum, Porzingis, and or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Chet Holmgren, Jalen Williams, and either Caruso or Hartenstein? Do you think they're ahead, right there in the conversation? Because to me, I don't know how you get better than Brunson, Towns, OG Anunoby, Bridges from a synergy perspective. It is perfectly synergistic.
I think it's better than. Damn, do I think this? I think it's better than the Boston group. Because of course, obviously, the first thing I think about spacing. Every one of those guys can shoot, and they range from very good shooter to elite shooter to best, one of the best shooters in the league. So you already have that check mark. Then you have two of the best defensive wings. Not only can they guard, 1 through 5 with those guys, but they can guard 2 through 4 at an elite level and completely shut down your offense, no matter what team you have. So they're kind of doing the Boston thing, but potentially at a higher level. I think OG Anunoby is the best perimeter or overall defender who's not a rim protector. The best overall defender of anybody in that group that we mentioned. I think he's a better defender than, Tatum, than Brown, than White, than Holiday, than Caruso. It's tough. I think he's probably better than Caruso, but I would be okay with somebody who disagreed with that. But I think he's that guy. And so you add Bridges to that. You add the spacing with Towns. The synergy is ridiculous. The pick and pops, the pick and rolls, fully spaced out. I think they probably are either 1 or 2 in that group. I think they're clearly better than the Boston group. The OKC group is interesting because who knows what this guy Jalen Williams' ceiling is. Like, I have no idea. The guy could be an all NBA guy, for the next 10 years. So I have no idea. So depending on where he gets, they would be number 1, but that is contingent on him making a leap. But I think they're right there with them.
Yeah. Sorry. I think from a synergy perspective, it's the best. I think all 4 guys are set up to be maximized now. There's nothing standing in their way. If they're in their optimal positions as often as possible and playing together, I see no reason why all 4 guys can't have career seasons, which is insane to say. Maybe not Towns, just because his impact was so high earlier in his career. That's just tough to replicate. As you referenced DJ earlier in this pod, it's going to be tough for him to get back to that level of offensive impact. But like the other 3 can be the best they've ever been from an impact perspective.
The one
I
thing I'll say
still,
is Towns did replicate it like 6 or 7 years in a row. So yeah, it still be tough for him to get back to it. But it's like DiVincenzo did it 1 year. Towns has done this like 6 years. So
yeah, no, that's true. I still think, I don't want to end on this note. I still think that I would take Boston to title over the Knicks, which sounds crazy to say. I do like Boston, assuming Drew Holiday doesn't fall off a cliff. I do like
you
their
mean for
support
this year? You mean for this year?
for this year, yeah.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
think
that's fair.
I think
that's fair. There's
Boston
nothing to say.
deserves to be betting favorites over. I think OKC deserves to be betting favorites over the Knicks. No other team in the league. I think the Knicks have eclipsed the tier now, though. I think they were in a tier with the second tier with a couple other teams. I think
With
they're
Philly, I think at least, yeah.
right. I think they're either alone in their own sort of second tier or they've joined the top tier. And I don't think your take is a hot one. I think if the Knicks do the right things, I think they can win a championship the next 3 seasons. And at the end of the day, I guess that's the goal. So not I guess, I know that's the goal. That we very clearly say that's our goal. So it really just all depends. If you're a Knicks fan, you came here to look for an answer. You're trying to make sense of all this. I think the best answer we can give you is we'll just ask you, how confident are you that Tom Thibodeau and Leon Rose are going to make sure that these guys are all in their optimized positions and their optimized roles? Because if they get there, this team can win a championship. So I think that's the only question remaining.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you got the pieces. There's a few you couldn't make some changes next year to improve the surrounding cast to some extent after you see how this year goes, if they don't go all the way. But I think they have the ability to do this over the next 3 years, and I genuinely think they will. Real quick on Timberwolves, I think their title chances drop. I think there's a lot of contingencies for them. I think it's contingent on the DiVincenzo that we see. I think the big X factor is the fact that Anthony Edwards is literally just turned 23. So we haven't seen the best version of Anthony Edwards yet, which is a little scary to say. I think he's going to be better. So I think that could offset some of the loss that they have from going from Towns to Randle. But I don't think he's in the perfect environment to actually see him. So I think we could see Edwards be a better player than he was last year and the best player he's been throughout his career, but have less of an impact overall because he doesn't have the right environment to really show that and optimize that improvement. So I'm not sure, but I think their title chances drop. I think it's not a precipitous drop because I think Randle's still really good and they still have awesome lineup combinations. They still have an amazing coach. They still have ascending young players like Edwards and Jaden McDaniels. So I think all of those things offset some of the loss in talent and synergy. But I do think on the net, their title chances do go down a little bit, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up McDaniels because I think that he still has plenty of growth in him. And it would be surprising to me if this is just who he is as a shooter. Maybe I'm biased by what his sort of reputation is, but he just has to be better at shooting threes. And I think he will be. I think that's the role they want from him. I think he's a super defender and they want him shooting threes whenever he's open. And I think that he's going to get better there. I also just think the Timberwolves title odds went down just because OKC got so much better. So, I mean, that's sort of elastic to what we're talking about with this trade here. But I think the Timberwolves are in a good spot. And I think it's less important for them that we decide whether their title odds went down or, fractionally up. I think that they're in a better position long term. Their two most important players probably are Edwards and McDaniels, and they're both going to make a lot of money. So I think that it's important for them that they put the best pieces around those two guys, especially Edwards, and they have the draft capital and flexibility to keep, making sure that the well around them is as big as possible and as vast as possible. I think that was difficult for them after the Gobert trade and paying Gobert with Towns' contract and having to extend McDaniels. I think they were just super handcuffed. And I think this trade frees them in a way that maybe getting slept on even if their title odds went down next year, which I'm not sure is true, I think they're going to look back in a few years and be, better off for having made this trade and getting off the Towns contract, which is why I think it's more important to the Knicks that this trade increase their title odds. I think they have to. If this trade didn't increase their title odds, it's a disaster. So I just want to make sure that point is illuminated. Timberwolves fans don't want to come on here and be like, oh, your team's tanking. I'm not saying your team's tanking. Of course not. I just don't think it's as important to their long term that their title odds went up in this next season as it is for the Knicks, because I don't think they're as all in anymore as the Knicks now are.
Yeah, it's an important point. And I think the Timberwolves are in a little bit of a different spot than the Knicks are. Naz Reid is going into a player option year. He's going to be a free agent. Obviously, he's going to get paid. Julius Randle is going into a player option year. He's going to opt out, and we'll see what he does and what he gets. Rudy Gobert is going into a player option next year, and it's at $46 million or $47 million. So I'm not sure if he'll opt in or opt out or what he'll do. So there's a lot in flux there. It's not as clean a situation as the Knicks just having their core locked up for the next 4 to 5 years. So we'll see. We'll see how things go for them. And I think it's a very important distinction that you made in terms of what is really important for Minnesota. And even if their title chances do go down a little bit this year, is that the most important thing? Whereas for the Knicks, their title chances over this year, next year, and the 1 year after that are everything that matters for that organization. So any last things you want to say, Geoff? I thought this was a great episode. Not to toot our horn too much, we've just done that throughout this whole episode, so maybe that makes it a bad episode. I'm not sure, but any last things you want to say?
No, just thanks to everyone who made it this far. We're actually doesn't think we can get to 1K YouTube subscribers by the end of the year. I believe in you people. You just got to click the button, and we gain some benefits. It's still just the two of us. I'm going to say that over and over again. There's so many good quality content out there, but it's literally just the two of us pumping all this out. And we really appreciate all you. We engage with every comment. So, give us your thoughts if you disagree with anything he said, especially if you disagree with anything we said. The whole point of this podcast is to incentivize respectful disagreement. So you come in here, you think we're idiots for thinking Towns can help the Knicks win a championship, or think we're idiots for thinking the Timberwolves' best lineup doesn't have Randle in it. Give us your thoughts as to why, and we'll be happy to engage with you. We love that. So thanks again to anyone who made it this far, and we hope you enjoyed the episode.
That was great. Great sign off. Well said by you, Geoff. Well heard by me and our audience, hopefully. Please give us a sub, and we'll keep the content pumping this season. It'll be great. We're really excited. Until then, this has been Hot Hand Theory.